Hi, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame, and this week I thought I would talk about portraits. It's something that we do as street photographers, is approach strangers about making their photographs. And I just wanted to talk about some of the things that I'm always keeping an eye out for when I'm out there making pictures of strangers. We're going to start off with this lovely picture that was made by Naterally Wicious. Shot with a Nikon D700 at 1/200th of a second at f4.5 at ISO 2500. Now, this was shot with a wide-angle lens. It's shot with a 35 millimeter on a full-frame camera. And one of the things that people typically say is that you should never shoot a portrait with a wide-angle lens because of the distortion that it can create. But I kind of favor a 35 millimeter lens, and sometimes I really don't mind the distortion that it creates. I like the intimacy and the immediacy that I can get from shooting with a wide angle. One of the things to avoid is trying to place your subject at the edges of the frame, because that's where the distortion will be really, really obvious. But for this shot here, I don't mind what is likely some distortion of her nose, as it's the closest thing to the lens. Sometimes you can be a little further back, but in this particular case, moving in close is probably a good idea, because what happens is that you create a shallower depth of field, and it's really important because you've got so much busyness behind her. We have what looks like to be a stack of chairs. We have some people over her right shoulder that are in the background, and those elements could be really distracting if they were sharp. That's one of the reasons why I'll use a shallow depth of field for situations where I can't move my subject, or I can't change my camera position to eliminate their existence within the frame. But when I can, I most certainly will try and move someone. And I don't know what the circumstances were here, but typically when I'm out on the street and I see somebody that I want to photograph, one of the very first things I start thinking about is, where do I want to put them? Because usually the place where I find them is not the place where I want to make the photograph, because there's just there's usually the light is either bad, or the background is busy, or both. And so when I see a subject, even before I've approached them, I'm already thinking about where am I going to put them in order to get better light and a better background. Sometimes that can't be avoided, and you just have to make do with what you can. That may have been the circumstances here, but you can see when you don't have those options of being able to move the subject into better light or a better location, using the tried and true shallow depth of field is a real nice way of remedying that. Here we have a shot by Musabbir Chowdhury, shot with a Nikon D7000 at 125th of a second at f1.8 ISO 100. And here he's using a 35 millimeter lens, but on this crop sensor camera, it's giving the equivalent of a 50 millimeter. The depth of field is still going to be the same as it would be with a 35 millimeter lens, but by using a very wide aperture, you're able to create that very, very shallow depth of field. And here, we don't have the distracting background that we had in the previous shot. Here, actually, these diagonal lines are a great setup, a great background for this subject, for this picture of this wonderful, wonderful boy. I really like the way these lines create a really nice dynamic backdrop for the portrait, and there's great light on him. It's almost like Rembrandt lighting coming from the right hand side. You get nice light on the side of the face, and some light here on the eye and on the cheek. It's really wonderful, and what's even better is that you have these sort of muted tones, and it serves as a really great counterpoint to the blueness of his denim and the sort of the turquoise of his shirt and his skin. It just makes for a really wonderful shot. And again, you're using a 35 millimeter, pretty close. So normally that would include some level of distortion, but here, it's not obvious. And I just really like the framing. This is an example of a time when having your subject in the very center of the frame kind of works. I know people are always thinking about the rule of thirds and about not having your subject in the very center, but a lot of times, sometimes having it smack dab in the middle of the frame really works beautifully. And I think I think it does here very nicely. All right, here is Michael Young, and he shot this with a Canon EOS 5D Mark III full-frame camera. Shot at 1/80th of a second at f1.6 at ISO 1000. In this case, he's using a 50mm lens. So on this full-frame camera, there's no crop factor at all. So 50 is a 50 in this case. And what I really love about this shot is, well, I love this woman's face. I love the gesture of her hands against her face. She seems to be intent on something, maybe watching television. She has a wristband on her, so she seems to be in a hospital or some sort of care facility. But the gesture and the expression is really at the heart of this image. But then build on that, and you got this great color. I mean, you have this warm tone that happens throughout the frame, and then her hair is almost kind of a little sort of bluish, and it just provides this great color contrast. I mean, this entire shot is just so rich with color. It's just wonderful. This image as a black and white might still work, but the reason I'm drawn to this photograph is because just the color palette here is so wonderful, and seeing the wristband really kind of tells us something about the setting, about where she is, and what she may be dealing with. And sometimes we photograph strangers, and this is, as he describes here, Aunt T. And I think whether you're photographing strangers or whether you're photographing people that you know, it's so important to be constantly aware of everything else in the frame besides your subject. If you remember the first two examples, you can see how there's a real improvement in the overall shot when the background is cleaner, it's free of clutter. Well, start thinking beyond that, and you start thinking about tone, about light, about all these wonderful things that make a really good photograph, and you infuse it into a picture of a portrait, and it's just great. I mean, the whole frame here. Michael is just owning it, and it makes for a really, really good shot. And I think when we're photographing people, we can forget about all the other things that are in the frame, usually because we're nervous when we don't want to overextend our welcome, or we don't want to bother people. But if you're thinking along those lines, more than likely you're going to make a bunch of mistakes, and your photograph won't be as good as you would likely want it to be. Here's this last shot by Musabbir, shot with this Canon 6D, another full-frame camera, at 1/250th of a second at f2.8, ISO 500. Now, here is the quick remedy, right, for any time you have a background that's busy or a bunch of distractions. It's just moving tight. And he's using a 200mm focal length at this point, so he's eliminating everything in the background by simply moving in tight on this person's face. And the shallow depth of field here comes into play because of the focal length, because of the proximity of the camera to the subject, and also because of the aperture. All three of those things are affecting the depth of field, so that his eyes are tack sharp, but the depth of field quickly sort of falls off here. You can see it especially around the ears and the hair here. All of this stuff is just blurred, but here in the center of the face, it's really nice and sharp. And whether you're using a 50 or a 200mm lens, moving in close is probably one of the easiest ways of being able to just focus on the person's face, and their expression. It's one of the reasons why I like moving in close, and why I favor 35 to 50mm lenses when I'm out shooting. I like to get in close. I know some people will shoot people with a 70 to 200 at a real distance, and I don't really like that. I like the intimacy and the immediacy of being close, and I know it takes a little bit of practice to get comfortable working this close to people, but when you take a look at shots like this as compared to something that is shot with a longer focal length at a great distance, not only see the difference, but I think you can actually feel the difference in the shots. So whether you're photographing your family, your friends, complete strangers, try to be conscious of everything that's in the frame, but think about how you want your images to feel. Think about what it is about this person that is drawing you, that is impelling you to to photograph them and what choices you can make to make a really, really good portrait. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that. And if you are listening to this and you would like to submit images to the Candid Frame Flickr pool, all you need to do is go to this page on Flickr and just ask to be added, and I'll be glad to add you. We have over 2,100 people in this group already, which is exciting to see. It just grows and grows every week. And if you've not heard of the Candid Frame, we have a podcast in which I feature conversations with photographers every week. And you can find that at thecandidframe.com. And if you're liking what you're seeing here, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and help spread the word. All right. Well, thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you next time.